A lot of Republican presidential hopefuls are happy with today's decision, including Vivek Ramaswamy, who joins us now in studio. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's good to see you.
All right, so I want to start out with something that you posted on Twitter, saying affirmative action is the single greatest form of institutional racism in America today. Why do you feel that way?
I think by definition, there are institutions that regularly take race into account as a factor on whether or not someone gets a job or whether or not someone gets a seat in college. By definition, that's institutionalized racism. And I think the Supreme Court made the right decision today to vote on the side of meritocracy over race-based preference.
Fair or on equal footing for black people.
I think that most people who benefit from affirmative action are the immigrants who came after Kennedy's immigration reform in the 60s. They are not descendants of slaves. They are not descendants of slaves. They are not descendants of slaves. They are people who came as immigrants like my parents did. People who came as immigrants like my parents did. Like my parents did. One who once did a bad thing.
You think your parents would have gotten the same shot without that legislation?
I mean, so it turns out that Asian Americans, Indian Americans don't benefit
take away
from...
that benefited your parents, which directly benefited you.
Yeah.
That legislation was put here to protect people that look like me, people that look like you, and I think you're ridiculous to want to get rid of.
And what Charlamagne is saying is your parents benefited from it.
They did not. I mean, as a point of fact, that's false. Indian Americans do not benefit from affirmative action.
No, that's not as a point of fact. No, that's not as a point of fact, because without the liberties that black folks have fought for, which has basically immigrants have been able to prosper in this country because of that. But we're not going to go there. Let's just say they benefited from being able to have the freedoms that black people fought for. That's the bottom line. And in turn, it benefited you. And
where anybody is free to achieve what they want. I don't know what they came to this country with not a lot of money. What benefited them was hard work and dedication. My dad faced layoffs when he was growing up at GE. Right. He went to law school at night to be able to keep his job. What did that teach me?
Affirmative action benefited him?
I don't think affirmative action benefited him. Absolutely not.
What the fuck did you mean by this?
I think that most people who benefit from affirmative action are the immigrants who came after Kennedy's immigration reform in the 60s. They are not descendants of slaves. They are people who came as immigrants like my parents did. I think that most people who benefit from affirmative action are the immigrants who came after Kennedy's immigration reform in the 60s. They are not descendants of slaves. They are people who came as immigrants like my parents did. And so I just think it is a
fucking liar and a hypocrite.
The 1965 Immigration Act has to be seen first and foremost as a civil rights measure. It was passed at that time when the U.S. Congress was passing a variety of civil rights laws, of course, the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And those laws eliminated discrimination, racial discrimination, prohibited racial discrimination in public accommodations. And there was a feeling in Congress that that same notion of ending discrimination should also be applied to U.S. immigration policy. Up until 1965, U.S. immigration policy was heavily biased in favor of Europeans, and in particular Northern and Western Europeans. Tens of thousands of immigrant visas were reserved for Northern and Western Europeans, while Southern and Eastern Europeans, and especially Asians and Africans and Middle Easterners, had very little chance to immigrate to the United States. They were discriminated against on the basis of their national origins.
That led to this Ramaswamy motherfucker, this Indian motherfucker, who's also an opposer of affirmative action. Affirmative action is you having your Indian ass in our country getting these benefits that you haven't fought for. Y'all wasn't in no riots. Y'all wasn't getting hung. Y'all didn't build no schools. Y'all wasn't enslaved. Like y'all don't have a fucking voice here. See, what we need to do as black Americans come together and stop all immigrants and get all immigrants deported. That's the number one agenda. Stop all immigrants and get them all deported. All immigrants. Because y'all come and water us down. If it was just black Americans and Anglo-Saxons, we'd have outnumbered them by now. Just in our country. But every time our numbers get up, they bring more immigrants in. They keep us at 13%. You notice that? You notice that we never leave 13%? You know why? Because their birth rate is declining. We have children like a motherfucker. Like we don't mind having kids out of wedlock. Like the less educated you are, the more kids you have. You understand that part? They don't educate us. So we will outnumber these motherfuckers in numbers, strength in numbers. That's why they always put abortion clinics in our communities and put fertility clinics in their communities, because the strength in numbers. They keep the numbers down. I think it's like 75 million blacks killed from abortions. If we had all them people born, right? They never had kids. It would have been like 200 fucking million deep in this country. But once again, they give us the motherfucking, Trojan horse. But as far as affirmative action go, affect y'all way more than affect us because we go without it anyway. Let's go without it. But my thing is this though. Rainbow Coalition is over. Black and Brown Coalition is over. Minority Coalition is over. Because now our next movement, our next civil rights is going to be exclusivity. No immigrants. This is just for Black Americans. When we turn up, we turn up and y'all coming up and our mix, we fucking y'all up too. Y'all can't join these riots. Y'all can't join these movements. It's exclusivity for blacks only. That's how we're going to be on it. That's how we got to be on it because y'all fucked everything up. Every time we give y'all open arms, y'all fucking shit on us, y'all turn on us. Fuck all y'all. We don't need none of y'all. We don't need Americans here.